Okay. Hi, welcome back to my channel. I remember at some point when I said I was going to be uploading every other week, and at the time I did mean that, and I still intend to try to do that going forward, but you know, life just kind of happens sometime. Now that we're in 2024, Happy New Year, I am going to actually mean it when I say that I'll be uploading more consistently, so sorry about that, but I'm back now. Today we're going to be talking about the Frasier revival. Now, this is something that I did not intend to talk about immediately. I obviously knew that I wanted to talk about it when I heard it was coming out because Frasier, the original series, was one of my favorite sitcoms of all time. I didn't think I would be wanting to talk about it this urgently. As soon as I watched the final episodes of the season, I knew that this was a matter that took precedence over any of the other projects that I had on my list. So we're going to be getting into it today. It's 2024, baby. Let's just jump right into it. Spoiler alert. Spoiler! Spoiler! If you have not seen the Frasier revival, the original Frasier series, or the Cheers television series, because we're going to be talking about all of it, believe me. And without further ado, let's get started.
Hey baby, I hear the blues are calling, tossed salads and scrambled eggs. Quite stylish.
So I'm going to be doing this PowerPoint presentation without glasses because I am now using a ring light to make my setup slightly less dinky and unprofessional. But whenever I have my glasses on, you see that. And that kind of just bothers me. And I feel like I just always just end up looking at that in my phone's viewfinder instead of actually paying attention to what the fuck I'm saying. So if I'm like straining my eyes for the sake of this video, you know, like, you're welcome. Before we get into the actual Frasier revival, I think it's important to first talk a little bit about what I have referred to on my channel as the epidemic currently poisoning Hollywood, and that is the spin-off era of film and television. Now, this is not something new. If you have seen my other videos and reviews of spin-offs, reboots, sequels, prequels on my channel in the past, and if you haven't seen those videos, like, why not? But if you haven't seen my videos on those topics and you are comfortable hurting my feelings like that, I talk a lot about how the spin-off era of Hollywood is something that kind of just invokes a bit of an allergic / hostile reaction in me whenever I hear that there is a spin-off, reboot, sequel, prequel. I'm going to use the words interchangeably, but whenever I hear there's a project like that in the works in Hollywood, I get a little bit like aggressive in a bad way. And it's mainly because the past 10 years it feels like no intellectual property is sacred anymore. We're now just making a spin-off or a reboot or a revival of literally everything. And I think a lot of it has to do with streaming platforms looking to have as much content as possible on their platform so they can entice you to subscribe, and having iconic source material getting rebooted or spun off is a good way just on name recognition alone to get people to subscribe to your channel. It's not to say that we haven't had spin-offs in the past, and it's not even to say that some of these aren't good projects. The sheer volume of this happening over the last 10 years in Hollywood, it gets very exhausting, and it gets to the point where nothing really feels special anymore. You hear that there's a spin-off of a project, you're not like, oh, sick, I'm really excited about that. You're like, what the fuck, man? All of these projects just feel like cash grabs. And yes, I know that every single project in Hollywood, the goal is to make money, right? If I'm a consumer, I'm expecting to kind of get an equal exchange, quid pro quo. I'm expecting that the product should not feel like a cash grab. Like, yes, it might be, but I don't want to feel like I've just been had whenever I tune into a show or watch a film. You know what I mean? Some spin-offs are good. Some reboots are good. All of those examples of ones that tend to stand the test of time more so than others have to answer the ever important question, so what? What gap does this fill in the narrative? What new perspective? Like, why are we making this? What is this giving me other than just nostalgia and warm feelings of something I've already seen before? If the thing can stand on its own without leaning entirely on what came before, those tend to be the more successful things that we remember fondly, rather than the ones that kind of fade into obscurity in the back of our minds after a year of them coming out. Now, why is this important for our discussion today? Well, this is kind of where Frasier comes in. It's all started with a sitcom series called Cheers from 1982 to 1993, often regarded as one of the most successful sitcoms of all time, based around the fictional character Sam Malone, who was a former baseball player for the Red Sox who owned a bar in Boston. The whole story kind of centered around a lot of the different colorful characters that came in and out of his bar over the last 11 years that the show ran for. Frasier was one of those characters that entered in season 3, and he stayed with the cast through the end of the 11th season, which is when the show wrapped up. I kind of pretend pretend that this show doesn't exist after season 5 when Diane left. It's not like I'm a Diane stan per se, but I feel like the show just kind of got a little bit more silly and not really what it once was around the time that her character was written out. So Frasier was a secondary character in the show Cheers. Definitely contributed positively to the series, but he wasn't really like the most memorable, the most hilarious character if you're looking just at his involvement in Cheers in a bubble, which made it a little bit more surprising when Cheers ended that there was the announcement that Frasier was getting his own spin-off series. Kind of seems like a strange choice on the surface. Now, why did Frasier work so well? So a lot of times when you're dealing with original source material that you're spinning off, there is the ever-present temptation to rely on what people already know, breaking us into the situation with nostalgia, remember whens, iconic lines from the prior source material to kind of ease you into where we are now. Frasier didn't really do that at all. Frasier started out by taking the character, moving him across the country to Seattle, an entirely different cast of characters, really no references at all to the show Cheers outside of just things for the sake of continuity, the fact that Frasier had a son and an ex-wife, and some of the characters popped in and out over the course of the 11 seasons, but really there's only like 5 or 6 episodes out of like 200 other than like Lillith and Frederick. Basically, Frasier had to start fresh. It was almost as if we don't have anything to work with other than just this faint history of this character that we kind of know from the other story. The show actually had to take these new characters and take this current character that we thought we knew and really put in the work as if it was just a new show without this history and this background to make it funny and stand on its own. Now, my thoughts on Frasier 2.0. I have mixed feelings, and I think that's kind of the consensus for a lot of people who are fans of Frasier. It's extremely inconsistent. I think there are some episodes that are very good, and by very good I mean like they're okay, and then other episodes that I'm like, God, I cannot wait for this to be fucking over. A lot of shows, some of the episodes at the beginning are pretty rough, and then they get better as they go along. With Frasier, it was very up and down for me, at least, throughout the entire series. You'd have a great episode, then you'd have a horrible episode, then you'd go right back up to like maybe it's okay, and then it drops down to I want to die, basically, and then it kind of just continued on like that throughout the series. Some of the characters for me in this show really worked. Some of the other characters were like, if I ran into you in a parking lot, I probably would try to run you over with my car because I cannot stand you. Really did feel like a lot of the characters, even the ones that I liked and thought were charming, felt like you didn't get much from them or any substance to them because a lot of the time and energy went towards developing Frasier and giving him things to do. One of the biggest glaring differences to me between the original Frasier and this one, and yes, we're going to be comparing them quite a lot because they're technically part of the same timeline, the same cinematic universe, if you will. The biggest difference for me was that there is absolutely no nuance to the writing in this new series. Everything just feels extremely obvious and like choppy with how things are written. It feels like every single time someone opens their mouth just purely for the purposes of dumping exposition on you or setting up Frasier or somebody else for a very obvious punchline that you could see a mile away. There are some moments that are funny. I did like certain bits and things like that, and there are a couple instances that did feel like, wow, this maybe could fit in the original series, but most of the time it just felt like the show was trying way, way, way too hard. And yes, that is something that you get with a lot of first seasons of television, whether it is a spin-off or whether it's its own thing. You know, that's just kind of the reality of what we're dealing with here. Okay, now the general plot to Frasier 2.0 is not necessarily that unfamiliar to what came before it in the original series. Frasier is a very successful television psychiatrist. When we last saw him in the series finale of original Frasier, he was following Charlotte to Chicago to be with her, and I guess when he landed, he decided to start this very, very big Frasier psychologist television show. And that ran for a very long time. It made Frasier tons and tons of money, and he was with Charlotte up until very recently prior to the events of the first episode. They just broke up. We also find out that John Mahoney's character, Martin Crane, passed away. John Mahoney, of course, passed away in 2018. And so they had a character pass away very recently as well, which is also very much weighing on Frasier's mind. So similarly to where we found Frasier at the beginning of the original series, he's going through a complete career change, a relationship change, and he just lost somebody that he very much loved in his life. And Frasier is on his way to Paris to kind of just process all of this. He has a very long layover in Boston and decides to use this opportunity to visit his estranged son, Frederick. Frederick and Frasier just had a falling out. They don't really get along, and Frederick did not show up to Martin's funeral. When he visits Frederick at his apartment unannounced, Not good boundaries, Frasier. Frederick really doesn't want to see Frasier, and that he's also living with this woman who turns out to be the girlfriend of Frederick's firefighter friend who just died in a fire a couple months ago. He's allowing the girlfriend and the girlfriend's newborn son to live with him because he wants to do the right thing and he's just a good guy, I guess. Frasier decides, in his infinite wisdom, he's going to take up a teaching position at Harvard and buy the building that Frederick lives in so that he could live across the hall and then manipulate/guilt trip Frederick into moving in with him, which is like not super great boundary. I feel like, yes, you want to rebuild your relationship with your son, but also it feels like you're just going from maybe being in the shallow end to jumping into the middle of the ocean. But you know, whatever. Okay, so what's super amazing and awesome for me is that I accidentally deleted the second part of my video talking about the writing and the plot in this series. Good for me. Anyways, what I was trying to say in the footage that got deleted because my life is a nightmare is that I don't think it's a bad thing to have the show somewhat resemble the general structure and setup of what came before from the original Frasier series. That's a fine place to start. Frasier being the father instead of the put-upon son is a different role for him, and I think it lended itself well to new things to explore. So looking at the high level, it wasn't a bad idea to start with. In terms of the writing of the individual episodes, it was not the best. I am really sorry to say. The writing for each episode felt extremely predictable, both in its dialogue as well as the progression of events from one scene to the next. It felt like things were just kind of happening for no reason other than the writers didn't know what else to do, so they just wrote random things and moved on. For example, in the first episode, we have a scene where Frasier is trying to reunite with his son Frederick and reconnect with him, but then all of a sudden, all of these other characters just kind of show up at Frederick's house for absolutely no other reason than to move the plot along. Kind of a very insane thing for them to know where he lives, but the show just kind of moves along because they don't know what else to do, and even Frederick is kind of just like, yeah, these teachers that my father knows, yeah, I guess why don't you guys come in for dinner as well? It's like, what the hell is going on? Each episode had a bit of a growing moment or a personal takeaway for most often Frasier, but sometimes Frederick as well. And in those situations, in and of itself, they were good, but the writers seemed to not really care how we got to the end and instead just kind of made people act in a way to service the plot, and nothing they did made sense whatsoever. There's absolutely no nuance whatsoever to any of the events happening, and as a result, the whole vibe of the show felt very manic. And sure, that's fine for a sitcom to a certain extent, and that was quite a lot of chaos in the original series from time to time, but you always have to have moments that bring you back down to reality, and I don't really think the show had enough of those to really manage to achieve a balance. A lot of dialogue is also very, very choppy, and it makes everyone sound like they're aliens who only learn to communicate by watching broadcasts of mediocre 1980s sitcoms and are trying to pass off as regular human interactions. Some characters are better at pulling off their lines than others, but on the whole, it makes it hard to really delve into the series or escape into it when the characters talk like not real human beings. Okay, so speaking of the dialogue, it's time now to talk about the humor in Frasier 2.0. I say this in all of my videos and I will say it again here. Humor is subjective. You may find something hilarious and I may not, and vice versa, and that's the way of life. That's totally okay. The humor in Frasier 2.0 is pretty rough. I will concede that there are moments that actually made me laugh, like not just exhale out of my nose, but actually laugh. And there were moments that made me want to end my life. It was a bit of a roller coaster, to be honest with you. Most of the jokes felt very obvious and clunky in their delivery, much like the dialogue in this show. You had one person setting something up with a joke, and then the other person executing it with the most obvious punchline known to man. And then because the structure of every conversation seems to just facilitate setting up a bad joke more than having characters talk like real humans, everything just sounded so strange, like the script was written by AI or something. There are a lot of bad puns, like I'm not exaggerating when someone said it's a real sofa's choice in reference to picking out a couch. I think I lost a year of my life almost immediately upon hearing it.
It's a real sofa's choice.
And I know it's really unfair to compare the old series to the new one, I know that, but the old series just had such a refined quickness to the writing, a cleverness, and a very precise way of phrasing things, where it was almost always funny but not trying too hard, and you really do not have that with this new series. We also need to talk a little bit about what I like to call the art of misunderstanding, which was a common source of humor in the original Frasier series. OG Frasier kind of wrote the book on causing a small miscommunication to spiral out of control and derived most of the humor from this basic episode structure. It's not to say that they were the only sitcom to do this and they were the only one to do it well, but I think Frasier did it the best. I know I'm biased, sue me, okay? You have episodes like the Halloween episode in season 5 where Roz is waiting to hear if she's pregnant, but everyone at the party thinks Daphne is pregnant with Frasier's child. You have the Christmas episode in season 5 where Daphne thinks Martin is dying, but he's really just going to church to be in a Christmas play with Eddie. And of course, you have perhaps one of the best episodes in the entire series where everyone at the ski vacation is trying to hook up with one another, and there's a perfect storm of misunderstandings as to which person is interested in who, all because Martin's ears didn't pop and he couldn't hear what anyone was saying. You get the idea. Sure, all the misunderstandings could be cleared up if you just were a prudent person who doesn't want to make an ass out of yourself and you ask just in case, but they're well constructed and believable. And more importantly, they're funny. In this new series, the writing tries to make those same misunderstandings, but does them in a kind of half-assed way. Clearly, no logical human being would ever do what the characters are doing, and it's all to further the plot because the writers, once again, don't know how else to do it. For example, in episode 5, Frasier and Frederick are supposed to be set up on a blind date by Eve, and neither of them are supposed to know anything about their respective dates, and when a woman shows up seemingly compatible for both characters, Frederick and Frasier both assume the woman is there for them. That obvious thing to do in the situation would be to ask the woman who she's here to date, and Frederick even verbalizes this to Frasier, and Frasier in response says,
"This is just getting silly. I'm gonna go ask June who she's here for."
No. We're in too deep for that.
Like, what the fuck do you mean we're in too deep? And it's all because the show needs to move forward regardless of whether it makes sense. And then the misunderstanding becomes less funny and more you just screaming at your television like, why are you doing this? So yes, there is a lot to be improved upon with the writing and the humor for this show specifically. But I don't think it was necessarily all bad. There were moments I did find funny. For example, in episode 2 when Frederick buys an air hockey table to piss off Frasier. That whole scene was really great. Alan popping a bottle cap with the Knight's Gauntlet he got stuck on his arm. Iconic. Firefighters thinking David was an orphan. Amazing. Adorable. Hilarious. There is potential in this show to be funny.
All night, divine.
Now let's talk a little bit about the characters in this series. Okay. Here's the thing. Generally, the characters in this season I found to be extremely inconsistent and extremely underwritten. I've said this many times in other videos on my channel where I talk about the cast of a revival series or a spinoff or whatever. They are absolutely essential to making this shit work. If they fail, then the entire series failed. Now, when you look at the original Frasier, and again, this is an extremely unfair comparison that I will proceed to make, of course, on my channel, but I acknowledge that it is a very unfair comparison. The original Frasier had a masterful cast of characters that surrounded Frasier. It wasn't Frasier carrying the entire series. Everybody pulled their weight, and I think the show was smart enough early on to recognize that it had a great potential of cast and characters and the performances and everything like that, and it wrote the show in a way that highlighted everyone's strengths, not just Frasier. With this series, you know, it is hard to just ignore the fact that we have 19 years of history of knowing Frasier, and we know him very intimately between two very successful and long-running television shows. So it's hard not to kind of make him the focal point of the series. I mean, it's named Frasier, for fuck's sake, so obviously we have to kind of like put him on a certain level of importance. That being said, I do think the show is maybe putting a little bit too much importance on Frasier to the point where every single other character in the series feels like they're just kind of props that just facilitate whatever Frasier needs. None of the other new characters in this show seem to have their own personality or voice, maybe just beyond one or two very exaggerated character tropes. Feel like we can connect to them or understand them, other than in the context of them allowing Frasier to grow and Frasier to learn more and Frasier to further his development. And I think that's kind of a problem. And yes, it is 10 episodes that we're dealing with. It is a very shortened amount of time, but I would say if you look at any other successful sitcom, including Frasier, from their first 10 episodes, they tend to do a better job of writing the characters so they're not just like facilitating one person. And maybe that's just kind of the catch-22 of having a revival series for a character that we know so well. It's like, unless if you have an extremely strong cast or some more continuity between what came before and now, it's kind of an inevitability that these other people are going to just seem bland and empty in comparison to someone we know for 2 decades. Now, I've kind of constructed a tier list of our new characters just for the purposes of kind of classifying how I feel about them. I felt like it would be a good idea. I don't know if it's necessarily necessary anymore because there's like not that many people in the show actually, but I thought it would be a good thing for my visual learners out there. So let's just kind of take a look at this. So my top category I named Delightful for some reason. I'm not really sure why. But in this category I have Eve and the Dalmatian dog from the 4th episode. Now obviously the dog I'm going to have to put in there because it's a puppy and he's cute and I feel like I don't need to explain myself beyond that. So Eve is the character that was the girlfriend of Frederick's best friend who died fighting a fire less than a year before the events of the series took place. She is living with Frederick at the beginning of the series and then becomes their across the hall neighbor in the apartment building that Frasier bought. Eve is a bartender at the local bar nearby and has a newborn son, and she is an aspiring actress. So Eve, yeah, there's not much to her other than this very tragic backstory that we learn about her at the end of the first episode. But I just can't help but feel like this actress is bringing a natural charm and charisma to the role. She seems like she's having fun with it, but not being very over the top and insane with her energy like some other characters are. And maybe some of the lines are kind of cringy that she says, but I feel like that's more the fault of the writers than her herself. I think she's just fun. Now moving on to our next category, potential for potential, we have Alan, who is Frasier's friend from college / doctorate school, wherever the fuck Cambridge that they went to. Apparently is one of Frasier's oldest friends who we never managed to hear a single word about in Frasier or Cheers, but whatever. And he is one of the people that kind of convinces Frasier to teach at Harvard and not go back to Chicago. Alan has one or two character qualities. He is very aloof and he likes to drink. And he has a cat that he hides in his office. So obviously I can relate to that. I think that Alan gets the funniest lines to say in the entire series. It's a similar theme like with everyone else. There's really not much to him. He has one or two over-exaggerated character qualities. But similarly to Eve, I feel very much like Alan is able to deliver his lines in a way that doesn't sound as cringy as the lines themselves. He has a nuance to the performance, and I think in some ways Alan seems like the character that could most fit into the original series without having it be completely jarring. But Alan ultimately just serves as the person that has to talk sense into Frasier at the end of every episode and tell him that he's being an ass, and that's kind of frustrating because there's really not much else to him. I think they need to realize that Nicholas Lyndhurst is doing a lot of the heavy lifting and they need to give him more to work with. Now, moving on to our medium category, we have Frederick and the Firefighter Gang. Frederick and the Firefighter Gang. Frederick is Frasier's son. He is a firefighter living in Boston, and we find out at the beginning of the series that they're estranged because Frederick decided to drop out of Harvard to become a firefighter. Kind of seems to emulate nowadays more the personality of Martin Crane, his grandfather, rather than the kid that we saw throughout the Frasier series who seemed to be allergic to everything and was very much into academics and things like that. Frederick, as a character, I think somehow manages to get the most character development out of any of the new people, but I do get frustrated by the fact that it seems like all of his character growth is in the context of his relationship to Frasier. That's not a bad thing, but if that's the only thing we're giving Frederick, it feels like we just don't know him outside of his relationship with his dad. Other than that, he too is also reduced down to he's just like Martin. He likes beer, he likes sports, he's a firefighter, whatever. And that's fine, but it's not much to go off of. That said, I do love the fact that Frederick constantly jabs at Frasier and reminds him that he's a terrible parent for being disappointed in his son being a firefighter. I think it's hilarious, and I think it's long overdue.
Sorry, Dad, just so I have this 100% crystal clear. You're thinking of dropping out? Of Harvard? No, but I was thinking, how long is it going to take my dad to mention he's teaching at Harvard? Under a minute. It's impressive. Nope, it's also not surprising. My dad's always felt that being a firefighter was somehow beneath me. I don't know, Dad, sounds kind of tricky. You think I can handle that since I'm just a firefighter?
Honey, is that true?
I like books about orphans. Wonder why.
Now, the firefighter gang, these are kind of the people that Frederick hangs out with at work. We see them kind of in the background here and there. I think they're kind of funny. We don't really get much from them other than the fact that one of them is named Moose, which is a reference to the dog that played Eddie in the original series, who has also unfortunately passed away. So I thought that was very sweet. They're just kind of there. They seem cool. I'm fine with them. I'm very neutral, but they're fine. In the I don't like you category, and I feel like this might actually be controversial, we have Olivia and David. Now, okay, I think part of the problem with a lot of these characters is the writing. I don't want to sit here and make fun of somebody's acting performance, but I will say that I think the character Olivia is not really the best performed character. There's not a lot of nuance or variety to how she's delivering her lines, and I think that kind of makes her a little bit of a grating character. Now, Olivia is the head of the psychology department. Initially, she was like pushing really hard for Frasier to work at Harvard because apparently the #3 psychology department in the country needs Frasier Crane to come make it better. She really is pushing for Frasier to teach at Harvard because she wants to beat out her sister, who is the same position at Yale psychology department. That's really her only quality. Once Frasier actually ends up working at Harvard, she's kind of like somebody that pops in and out. She kind of jabs at Alan a little bit, and he's just another body that Frasier can talk to about whatever the fuck he's dealing with. Her energy is like so crazy and intense sometimes that it's like extremely off-putting.
As they say, a no is just a yes in a trench coat.
She's just a lot. She does calm down towards the end of the series, and she's just kind of fine. But when she's acting like so over the top, it's very grating, and I don't like it. Finally, in our category, we have David, who is Niles and Daphne's only son, who was born in the series finale. Sorry, Nick, spoilers. I know you haven't finished Frasier yet, but I got a job to do here, you know? So he is Frasier's nephew, Frederick's cousin, and he is starting his freshman year at Harvard, which is kind of funny because Niles went to Yale, so I don't know what's going on with that. So David is like, I kind of almost feel bad for this character because in some ways he should be way more important than he is. He is a central figure that is related to not only a lot of the characters in this new series, but he is connecting to two of the main characters from the former series that are no longer here. So you'd think there'd be more for him to do, but he is specifically relegated to having only one character quality in this entire series, and that is being so painfully awkward it makes you want to die. I swear to God, if you put him, Leia Foreman from That 90s Show, and Ellen from How I Met Your Father in the same room, the world would fucking implode because it just cannot handle that level of awkwardness. He is only allowed to be that, and that is the punchline for many of the quote-unquote jokes in this series, and it just seems like the characters in the show don't even like him. He's just like there, he kind of pops up, and then everyone makes fun of how painfully awkward he is while he just kind of sits there and pretends like he doesn't know what's going on. I'm sure the actor is doing the best he can with the role he is given because he's really not given that much, but it just seems like if this is supposed to be an interpretation of Niles Crane but just a younger generation, it is not working. He does have a couple good moments, including in the finale when he and Alan decide to play a little Christmas game at Frasier and Frederick's Christmas party, where they try to get other guests in conversation to say any of Santa's reindeers naturally without them knowing what's going on. And I thought that was really cute because it allowed him to act like a normal human being and not like the most awkward person in the history of existence.
Sometimes you wanna go where everybody knows your name.
I have a lot to say. So let's first talk about what was not in this show. Now, like I mentioned several times in this video, the actor who played Martin Crane, John Mahoney, passed away in 2018. Very, very sad. The show did a really beautiful job of paying tribute to not only the character that John Mahoney brought to life for 11 years of this show, but to John Mahoney as well. So I think it made sense to have Martin Crane also pass away. I think it provided a lot of driving of the story and the general feelings and conflicts that set up the entire series in a very appropriate way. Consequences on both Frederick and Frasier felt very appropriate and very natural, and I think those moments where they sat down and had conversations about Martin, there's a really beautiful moment at the end of the first episode where they pay tribute to John Mahoney. It's just this little clip from Frasier, and then it says, "In loving memory of John Mahoney."
It all works out.
I was emotional, I'm not gonna lie. And then on the 10th episode of the series, you see Frasier unpacking a lot of the Christmas decorations that Martin had. That was a big storyline in the original Frasier series, including Martin's dancing Santa. And at one point, Frasier's getting emotional and he says, "I really miss you, Dad." And then the dancing Santa all of a sudden dances on its own.
Dad, I really miss you.
I'm getting choked up. I'm literally getting choked up. And it's just a really beautiful moment. They also named the bar that is kind of like the central watering hole for a lot of the characters in this season after John Mahoney. They named it Mahoney's Bar. And then, like I mentioned, Moose, the dog that played Eddie in the original series, is the name of one of the firefighter characters in this new one. So I think handling that material overall, there really was no other option other than to handle it well, I think, because otherwise people would have been really fucking mad. And I think the show just did a wonderful job with it. Niles and Daphne are living, I think, in Seattle still, and their son is going to Harvard and living in Boston because he's at school. So it makes sense, I guess, that they're not there because David's really only there because he's, going to college. We do hear references from time to time about text messages that Frasier gets from Niles, or stories apparently that Niles told David. And I think that feels fine. Their presence is definitely missed. I love David Hyde Pierce's performance as Niles. I think it is one of the best sitcom performances of all time. It is so great. I love it. And then finally, we have the whole absence of Cheers. Now, we have Frasier and things that happen in Frasier referenced quite a lot in this first season, and it's not, I don't think, over the top, but there are a lot of frequent references. We don't really have any references to Cheers at all. There's like one or two times where Frasier references coming back to Boston, and obviously Lillith is in an episode. We'll get to her in a second. Don't you worry about that. Really, other than Frasier mentioning I did spend time at a bar in Boston when I was last here.
Not sure I was ever my best self here. I may have spent a little too much time at a certain bar.
But other than that, there's really no references to anything. No character updates, nothing like that. I'm sure all of the characters and the actors from the original series Cheers did not want to be in this show. Even just maybe an offhand comment about like, oh, I caught up with Norm or whatever. Like, it just seems like Frasier is just so above that, which is kind of weird, but whatever. Now let us talk a little bit about our returning characters. Let's talk about Frasier in Frasier Revival of Frasier. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that Kelsey Grammer does a very good job in this performance. He's been playing Frasier for 20 years now. He slips back in as if no time has passed, and I think that's really impressive. Frasier seems to be the only character that the writers are interested in giving any character development to. I think it's definitely the easiest place to start because we know so much about him. The character arcs that they do give to Frasier this season seem to make sense for where he is at in his life. The biggest conflict obviously in this season is Frederick's relationship with Frasier and this kind of tension that they have after however many years of not being really in touch and not really seeing eye to eye, and that's what's a driving force for a lot of Frasier's character development. I think for the most part it's kind of handled well, but there are also kind of clunky aspects to it where I think that the show had an idea of what the ending point wanted to look like, but they did no idea how to get there. So I think overall Frasier is the most fleshed out character, and that makes a lot of sense, but there are also a lot of inconsistencies with how he's written. Now, I just want to acknowledge that, it might seem like I am being very nitpicky when I talk about inconsistencies, but when you have a character like Frasier and a show like this Revival series that has so much history, literally over 2 decades of history, it's hard to not talk about inconsistencies because we know Frasier so well. We have 19 years of information about him. There's a couple things that I feel like could have been handled better. So first of all, and this is something I have a problem with in the original Frasier, you can ask anybody who's watched Frasier with me, which is like 4 people, but you can ask them. So Frasier spent like 8 years at the bar Cheers in the Cheers series. He was surrounded by a ton of sports fans, constantly watched sports. Sam fucking Malone, the person who owned the bar Cheers, Sam Mayday Malone, was a pitcher for the Red Sox.
Don't you know who this is? He used to be one of the best pitchers in baseball. Samuel Mayday Malone.
All of these people would talk about sports all day, every day, and Frasier was like in the thick of it for 8 years. And yet in this series, he doesn't know how to pronounce the Boston Celtics.
The 1986 Boston Celtics.
Why does everyone insist on mispronouncing Celtics?
And Frasier can't wrap his head around the fact that Frederick's little box of dirt from the World Series field at Fenway would mean anything to him. It just seems like completely inconsistent. And I feel like those inconsistencies are for the sake of making Frasier so out of his element with Frederick, when in reality it's just like, no, you obviously would know what that is. I also feel like even for a person like Frasier, who, again, I'm not being a hater, I don't hate Frasier. Frasier can be a little bit about himself and a little bit annoying, both in this series as well as the original one. I think even keeping that in mind and knowing that he's just kind of like that, I felt like the writers kind of went a little bit over the top with a lot of the things that he did throughout this season. One of the big conflicts between Frederick and Frasier is the fact that Frederick dropped out of Harvard, and that was very disappointing to Frasier because Frasier had certain expectations of what his son was going to do and what he was going to be. Now, first of all, I think it's kind of strange that he seems disappointed that Frederick became a firefighter because Martin was a police officer, and Frasier talks constantly in the old show and in this new series about how proud he was of his father and how amazing it was that he was like protecting people and doing this really important job. But with his son, he's like, man, I'm just like really disappointed in you, and like I felt like you deserved better. Like I felt like you were capable of more. Why? Why is it okay for your dad but not for your son? And then on top of that, Frasier will literally make comments to Frederick like, yeah, you dropped out of Harvard. I thought you were capable of more. It feels like, you know, you're wasting your potential and shit like that. And then in the 4th episode, when Frederick vocalizes to Frasier that he thinks that Frasier is not proud of him, and Eve even tells Frasier that Frederick feels that way, Frasier's like, what? No, that's not it at all. I'm just worried he's going to get hurt in a fire. Well, no, you literally did say that to him. You literally said that you thought he was capable of more and this is kind of beneath him. But now you're acting like you can't imagine why anyone would think that way. So like, which is it, Frasier? Which is it? I will also just close with one note. And I know this is annoying and it probably is not important to anybody but me. The fact that Frasier Crane is teaching a class at Harvard wearing jeans and tennis shoes. Not my Frasier. I understand that fashion can change over the years and they were probably like $1,000 tennis shoes, but from my perspective, they kind of look like something you could get at DSW. And I just feel like my Frasier would just not do that. You know what I mean? Talking about our other returning characters, we have Roz and Lillith. Now, these were the 2 people that were willing to come back to the series of the ones that were in Cheers and Frasier originally. Roz was only in Frasier. She was his producer from KACL when he had his radio station in the original show. She comes back in the season finale for this revival series, and she's kind of Frederick's Christmas present to Frasier, is just having her come back and surprise him because Frederick is sensing that Frasier is maybe getting a little sad, a little sentimental around the holidays. This appearance of Roz feels a little bit like in that 90s show where the actor said, okay, I will come back for one scene and that's about all that I will give you. But it was nice to see her again. Peri Gilpin looks like she has not aged a fucking day since 2004, so like, good for you, I think. Overall, it just felt like a little bit of a wasted opportunity. They just kind of get a drink, and then Roz joins Frederick and Frasier's dinner party with a ton of people that she has no idea who they are, probably. If the rumors are true that the actress who plays Roz is interested in being a series regular if the show is picked up for a 2nd season, I think that would be great to have somebody like her be a counterpoint to Frasier, somebody that's a little bit more familiar and that feels a little bit more of an organic chemistry with Frasier than these random new people. Now let's talk about Lillith. I have to pick up my microphone for this one. I have a lot of opinions about Lilith's appearance in this series, and she was only in 1 episode. So, like, yeah, Lillith is a character from the show Frasier and Cheers. She originally appeared in Cheers as Frasier's love interest. They were psychiatrists and they ended up getting married. They had a son, Frederick, you know Frederick from the show. Eventually, towards the end of the series in Cheers, she cheats on Frasier, and that's kind of one of the inciting incidents that convinces Frasier to move to Seattle at the beginning of the original Frasier series. Lillith also appears, you know, maybe once a season in Frasier for the sake of continuity, along with Frederick at the end of the Frasier series. They have a very wonderful moment in Lilith's final episode where they just, you can tell that they're not meant to be together and they don't want to be together, but they will always love each other and understand each other, and I think that was just a really beautiful episode. Lillith has a personality because it's relevant for my analysis here. In the 2 prior iterations that we've seen with Lillith, she's always a very stern, direct, to the point person. She's my ISTJ queen. People make jokes about her being very cold and severe all the time, very intense. She just doesn't have a lot of warmth to her, you know, and that's fine. But it never seemed like Lillith was doing that for any other reason than just that's how she is. It's not like she's trying to do it to like make people uncomfortable on purpose. Lillith, why can't I say Lillith? Lillith. I just say like I'm doing a waterboarded or something. So Lillith just kind of does it because that's how she is. In this new series, Lillith is portrayed as a bitch. I don't know how to think of a better way to describe it than she's just such a bitch for no reason. She makes jokes about how she like relates to North Korea, if that gives you an idea of what they've done with her character.
We need to keep you separate, like North Korea and South Korea.
She's North Korea.
I'm North Korea.
And I think that's just like the biggest character assassination that I just was not expecting. And to make matters worse, the whole crux of the episode that she's in, it's Frederick's birthday party, and Frasier wasn't invited because Lillith is going to be there. Lil, apparently that's how her name is pronounced. Lillith is going to be there, and apparently Frederick doesn't want them to just be arguing the entire time because Frasier and Lillith can't be in the same room with each other without them, making it about themselves and just screaming at each other. Since when? I mean, the last time we saw Lillith was a wonderful episode where, like I said, they came to this great understanding. I will always appreciate you and love you in our own way. And now they just have never been able to be in the same room with each other. Like, what the fuck? In Frasier, there was an episode in season 4. Frasier invited Lillith and Frederick to Thanksgiving, and they ended up going to Lilith's house in Boston to have Thanksgiving there. But they're never allowed to be in the same room with each other. They're about to spend fucking Thanksgiving together. Yes, I know what you're gonna say. I know what you're gonna say. But that was 19 years ago. Maybe something happened in the time since. And maybe it did. But that's kind of one of the catch-22s about having a revival series about a show that we have so much history about and that has had so much time pass since the last time we saw these fucking people. You have to catch us up as to why things are different. If the show had like 1 or 2 sentences, like a throwaway line of exposition explaining to us why Frasier and Lillith cannot all of a sudden be in the same room together, I would have been fine. You know, that's all we really need. But from where I sit right now, it just feels like the writers did not understand this character, did not understand this dynamic, did not understand the prior Frasier series, and is just writing whatever the fuck is going to make the plot happen. That's really how a lot of this feels.
Dr. Crane, he can fix your brain.
Alright, now let's talk a little bit about my Thunderbolts and Stellas stars of the series. Now, if you have watched my Only Murders in the Building series, and if you haven't, like, why the fuck are you still here when you're so adamant on hurting me? But in those videos, I talked about how I'm a huge fan of the show Spy Family, and in that show, they have this fictional school where the students get something called a Thunderbolt badge if they do something really bad, and they get Stella stars if they do something really good. And I've used that terminology in my videos in the past. Talk about administering these badges, good and bad, for things that I like and didn't like in a show that I'm reviewing. So I'm going to do that again. So the 5 Thunderbolt badges of this first season of Frasier, in no particular order. Number 1 is obviously the Lillith character assassination, for reasons I literally just described. Thunderbolt badge number 2, the fact that the Dalmatian in the 4th episode is no longer in the show and wasn't in any other episodes other than that one scene. Why would you just show me a puppy and then be like, yeah, that's all you're gonna get, we're not gonna show you this puppy anymore? Number 3, Thunderbolt badge of the series, every single line that David speaks in this entire show, it's horrible. It's really bad. I think he's probably one of the worst characters in any revival series that I've ever seen. Number 4, Thunderbolt badge of the series, Olivia saying a no is just a yes in disguise. Girl, no, it's not. And number 5, Frasier wearing jeans and tennis shoes. Like I said, I do not accept this. All right, now let's talk about the good things, because I like to admit nothing but love and light on this channel. Number 1, Stella stars of the season. Freddie absolutely slam dunking on Frasier being a bad parent. The fact that Frederick constantly reminds Frasier that he's a hypocrite and that he's a narcissist and that he was a very absent parent in many of the years that Frederick was growing up. I love it. Number 2, Stellas of the season. David's sweater. I never thought I would say that. I was watching the series with my parent. Every time David was on screen, everyone in the room was just like, Jesus Christ. But then I was looking and I'm like, oh, his sweater is cool, I would wear that. And then the next scene, I'm like, oh, his sweater is really cool, I would wear that. Why did they give David all of the cool sweaters, but then just like give him absolutely nothing else to work with as a character? Number 3, Stella stars of the season, the tributes to John Mahoney and Martin Crane.
It all works out.
Number 4, Alan using knight armor that he got his hand stuck in to open a bottle of beer. Fucking loved that. And number 5, the fact that we found out that Bulldog sang opera at Martin's funeral.
The police send-off. Daphne's toast. Bulldogs, Ave Maria.
Now, Bulldog is a character from the original series, and yes, it is a shameless reference to things that we know from the past, but if you watch the original series and you know who Bulldog is, the mental image of that, while sad, is also just fucking amazing. If you're having a bad day, might I present to you Lulu in a little mini sweater. It says woof on it. It is a dog sweater, but I mean, we can just pretend that it doesn't say that because she looks just so absolutely stunning. Yes. So welcome back to whatever the hell this is. I have some breaking news about the Frasier Revival series that I wanted to stick at the end of this video to share with you all. As of today, January 19th, 2024, I think it was yesterday afternoon, it was officially picked up by Paramount for a 2nd season. Now, how many episodes in a season they're going to be, I'm not entirely sure, but we'll have to find out. Do I think that it was fair for Frasier to get renewed for a second season. Sure, you'd have to be a really dog shit show to be not renewed for a second season or to not deserve to have a second season, because I think most shows really find their voice and their stride, at least through the second season. In the first season, they might be trying to figure things out or experimenting with what works and what doesn't. So I think it makes sense to be able to give a show a chance beyond just a couple episodes that might not be indicative of what's to come. So there's that. I also wanted to just talk about a couple of the quotes that I saw from Kelsey Grammer throughout the week about a potential season 2. These quotes were made in the context of the news not being released yet or revealed yet that there is going to be a second season. And I think a lot of these quotes were made by Kelsey Grammer in the context of him trying to get people hyped for a potential season 2 if that were to happen. And I thought they were very interesting and potentially telling of what we could find in another season, and I thought I would share them with you now. So let's do that. I would first like to raise the quote that I read in an article that for some reason I can't find anywhere anymore. I don't know if I hallucinated it or what. I wouldn't be surprised. But I saw a quote somewhere in an article from Kelsey Grammer, the man who plays Frasier Crane, who said that he believed the revival series was funnier than the original Frasier. Respectfully, sir, are you insane? I don't know how you could possibly have that opinion. The fact that somebody in this show said a no is just a yes in a trench coat, man, I don't know. Now looking at some of the quotes that Frasier, aka Kelsey Grammer, has made. Situation here. Don't look at my password. In talking about season 2 and the future of the Frasier series, Kelsey Grammer made a quote that he expects the Frasier reboot to continue well beyond a second season, expressing that he hopes to make at least 100 episodes of the revamped series if possible. All I'll say about this is that I could only aspire to the level of pride and confidence that Kelsey Grammer has in his job and his worked product, as opposed to the crippling feeling of imposter syndrome that I have about mine. And that's all I'll say about that quote. So speaking about the vision for season 2, now a lot of these articles make clear that there is nothing set in stone with the writers or with Kelsey Grammer in terms of what's going to happen in season 2. These are just ideas that Kelsey Grammer has or perspective that he wants to see demonstrated in season 2. One of these articles indicates that if there were to be a second season, we might not actually see the same cast and crew because it might follow Frasier doing something else, moving to another city once again other than Boston. So in this article it says Frasier's return to Boston was motivated by wanting to reconnect with his grown-up son Freddie. What was supposed to be just a short visit turned out to be a permanent move after realizing the status of their relationship. Frasier and Freddie's relationship is the most important storyline in Frasier reboot, culminating in the season 1 finale, which effectively resolved the show's main storyline. This gives Frasier the liberty to leave Boston knowing that he has patched things up with his younger Crane. The relocation also resolves 2 major issues, including his Harvard storyline, and then it talks about how the Harvard storyline kind of sucks, which not going to disagree on that. I had some very mixed feelings about this. I think that this could have good and bad consequences. On the one hand, it's kind of Frasier's MO to be able to start over, do different things. That's what he did in the original series, and that's what he did in this revival series, moving to a new city, being surrounded by completely different people. We had in one situation, it worked out extremely well, and then we had in another situation, it did not maybe do that quite as well. I feel like if this were to happen every season and we have Frasier just restarting with new characters, that potentially could lead to just having the same problem we had with this first season, but just repeating it every single time. You don't really get attached to these characters because you know they're going to come and go like everyone else. You know, you have to really rush to give people these inorganic backstories or character qualities that feel very exaggerated because you don't really have time to otherwise establish them. And then by the time you start to maybe care about them, or these characters start to find their footing just a little bit, they're gone from existence, and really the only connective thread would be Frasier. And it's not like I'm a Frasier hater or anything like that. Like I've said many times in this video, the strength of the original Frasier series was Kelsey Grammer allowing the very strong cast of characters that he surrounded himself with to grow and carry a lot of the comedic weight rather than him having to do it all by himself. With this series, one of the things I didn't like was we don't have that. Frasier is the be-all end-all of everything, and I don't think he's a strong enough character to be able to pull that off. And to do that every season, while yes, maybe we'll get characters that are slightly less obnoxious, you know, it still all comes back to Frasier, and Frasier is just not that interesting. So I don't know if that would necessarily be the best idea, but it is an interesting take, and I could see how in the short term it would entice people to tune in for another season. Kelsey Grammer also made comments about the fact that if the series were to return for a second season, he would love to have Roz, who was a character in the original series, come back as the series lead. Now, this is something that Perry Gilpin had expressed interest in if the show was renewed for another season, which is interesting because none of the cast from the original series was interested in doing this. Maybe Perry Gilpin was just waiting to see how the show was going to take form and whether it was worth getting invested in it. It doesn't really say in this article whether there's going to be a particular direction for Roz or why she would be following Frasier around or what she would be doing. Kelsey Grammer shared that he is open to Frasier crossing paths again with Sam, who is the original main lead from the show Cheers. Whether this happens in Frasier season 2 or at any time in the future, he stressed that the reunion needed to happen under one condition: if Sam Malone is still alive and has a vital connection of making Frasier to move to another place. First of all, why would Sam not be alive? He would be 70, right? I also find it strange that he thinks that it needs to be Sam encouraging him to leave. I think it would make more sense for Sam, if anybody, to come back from the Cheers universe, because I think Sam, before they kind of ruined his character after season 5, does have a lot of interesting perspective on people, and it would be nice to see them reunite because they have a really interesting dynamic. But I would love to see Ted Danson. I love Ted Danson, so I think that would be a great reunion and a nice return that didn't feel very shoehorned. But on the opposite end of that, there's also an article prior to the news that Frasier was getting a second season that Kelsey Grammer expressed if there was one person that he wanted to return from the Cheers universe, it would be Diane, because he felt like she needs to give Frasier a lot of closure. Like I said, I'm not a Diane stan. I think Shelley Long does a great job of making Diane just an insufferable person, but in a really funny way. But I don't necessarily think that Frasier needs that kind of closure because he already kind of got it in the original Frasier series. I don't really think it's necessary anymore. I mean, the events that happened with Diane and Frasier happened in the 80s, which is 40 plus years ago at this point. So how much closure can a person need or want? Overall, I'm not entirely surprised, like I said, that Frasier got renewed. Whether he'll have 100 episodes of a story to tell, I don't know. I was just about to film my outro and just wrap up this video, but then I remembered I have a surprise for you guys. That's right.
We're not done yet.
Now let me just break down what this is. I feel like I've talked a lot on my channel about television shows and movies that are not original source material, and I found that there are a lot of upcoming projects in 2024 and beyond that fall into this category that I fully intend to talk about on this channel. Now, that's not going to be my entire identity. That's not going to be everything I talk about. We'll talk about other film and television projects as well. But I feel like I have a special soft spot in my heart, and by soft spot, I mean burning internal rage about the topic. I feel like we have to figure out a way to kind of classify all of these things together and kind of make it more of a series on my channel. So in the effort to do that, I have decided to put together a tier list of some of my personal favorite, and by favorite I mean ones that I'm aware of and have seen, spin-offs, reboots, sequels, prequels, revival series, what have you. Ones that we have talked about on this channel and ones that I've just seen in my lifetime, and I've put them together in a tier list, and I thought it would be fun that every single time I talk about a project that falls into this category going forward on my channel, we could add to this tier list. Now, I have also made the decision, because there are a lot of projects on this tier list that I have made, that it might be fun to also just make a video talking about me making this tier list as a whole, because I have a lot of opinions about a lot of the projects on this tier list, obviously. So that's going to be an upcoming video in the next couple weeks as well, and I figured we should, kind of christen this tier list by figuring out where to put Frasier 2.0. Overall, I think the show was okay. There were things about it that really bothered me. Like I said, there's a lot of natural pitfalls to taking source material that you have 20 years of history going in and then trying to make it its own thing and, figure out where to go next from there. There is potential, I think, to improve, just like with a lot of projects of this nature. I think the first season is never going to really be the best one. I'm trying to figure, because the other two big sitcom revival series I've talked about on my channel were How I Met Your Father and That 90s Show. And I'm trying to think about how I think of this new Frasier series in relation to those shows. And I feel like I liked the Frasier series a little bit more. I feel like I genuinely laughed a little bit more at the Frasier series. There were some moments that were actually pretty good and pretty funny, whereas with those other two shows, I don't think I genuinely laughed, actually laughed maybe more than once. I think I might put Frasier in either medium or underside of matte. I don't know. So anyways, yeah, that's all I really have to say about Frasier. I know that was a lot. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you again for joining me in 2024. I have a lot of fun projects to put out and I'm really excited about, so please stay tuned. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Let me know down in the comments what you think of Frasier 2.0. I know that it's been a little bit of a controversial topic of fans of the original show, so I'm really curious to hear what you guys think. In the meantime, I'm going to go pay attention to my cat because otherwise she's going to murder me in my sleep. So, bye-bye.